Welcome, everybody. We'll do a call to order of today's CCP meeting. Madam Clerk, will you please do a roll call? We don't hear you. It appears that you're off mute, but we don't hear. At least I don't.
We still can't hear you, Julie.
Well, maybe Julie can try signing back in or just calling in with the landline, and one of us can do the roll. Dan, if you like, I could just go ahead and go down the list here.
If you don't mind, Phil, that would be great. Thank you.
All right. So Chief Probation Officer Fruitnick is here. Presiding judge or designee, anybody from the court in attendance? No. County Supervisor Provenza. See Jim here.
I'm here. Yes.
District Attorney, we have Jonathan Raven, I believe. Jonathan, you here?
Yes, I am. Thanks.
There you are. Sorry, I don't see everybody on my screen at one time. Public Defender.
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, and on behalf of the sheriff today, I believe we have Captain Oviedo. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm here as well.
Excellent. Let's see. Winters Police, Chief Miller.
I'm here.
Okay. Karen Larson.
I'm present.
All right. And do we also have Ian Evans for alcohol and substance abuse?
I just moved him into the panelists, so he should be coming.
Okay. I'll come back to him. County Office of Ed, Superintendent Lewis. Anybody from the Office of Education?
This is Garth. I'm here.
Okay, great. And do we have Mark Nigel representing community-based organizations? Okay, and then finally, Laura Valdez, the individual representing victims.
I don't think she's here.
All right, let's see. And so I was going to go back to somebody, Ian Evans. Ian, are you here?
I am. Good afternoon, Phil.
Okay, very good. So it sounds like we've got just about everybody except for a representative from the court and Mark Nigel, the community-based organization representative.
Mark is here.
Mark is here. Present.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that if you said it earlier. Okay, well then in that case, everybody except a court representative.
Okay, perfect. Julie, do you mind? Can we do a quick test with you real quick to see if we're working?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
Perfect, thank you. Today's meeting of the CCP is being held telephonically pursuant to Governor's Executive Order number N2920, issued on March 17th, 2020. The order allows governing bodies of local agencies to hold their meetings electronically, provided that members of the public can also observe and provide public comment electronically. A few guidelines for today. If anyone wishes to speak, please just identify yourself. And let's try not to walk on each other. Please ask if you may speak. That way we don't step on each other. And we'll have public comment after each agendized item. With that being said, consider approval of the agenda. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion. Tracy.
Can I get a second?
Second, Jonathan.
Okay, seconded by Jonathan. Madam Clerk, will you do a roll call, please? Roll
Yes.
call vote, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And then I'll be doing a roll call of the executive members for this agenda. That would be,
So,
is that correct?
well, Phil, do you mind guiding us on that? Is it the overall larger group or the executive committee for this?
It'd be the full group.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Phil. Okay, Supervisor Provenza. I think he's non-voting though, I think.
Non-voting, yes.
Okay, and then Jonathan with the district attorney.
I'm here.
Okay. How do you vote? Tracy, public defender, Tracy Olson?
Aye.
Captain Herno Aveda, was she representing the sheriff?
I have
Thank
a
you.
question about that. Historically, we've had the sheriff and the undersheriff as the backup. And I think every department's only had 2 voting members. Each department's only ever been authorized to have up to 2. So I don't think Captain Oviedo can vote.
So this is why we need bylaws, not to jump ahead. But I don't know the historical practices of this group well enough to tell you what the practices have been. I would say the sheriff gets to appoint a designee. The way the bylaws propose to set that up is that as long as the designees are identified in advance in writing or email to the CCP chair, they are able to participate fully. I mean, it's frankly up to all of you, but we're voting on the agenda, so I wouldn't make a big deal of it one way or another. And it's a fair question to raise, you know, what the appropriate method for establishing a designee is. But, you know, I offer that just as a comment, and do what you want with it.
Yeah, historically, we've nominated a backup. And so we've all through CCP nominated a backup. It doesn't matter for agenda, but it's going to matter later today.
So what I would say to that, this is Jonathan, is I agree with Phil, and I guess I agree with Tracy. Historically, we have had a backup, and that person had to have been designated ahead of time, but I don't think there was ever any rule that you could only have one backup. So that's kind of my understanding. I mean, we didn't decide that one way or the other. Just historically, I think there's only been one backup, but there's been no rule against the department head designating more than one person as a backup.
And for right now, if it makes things easier, I'm just voting on the agenda for now. I'm probably going to abstain from, or I am going to abstain from voting on anything else that comes up during this meeting.
Okay, then it sounds like we can complete the roll call with for the agenda, the roll vote, and then it'll get into a bigger discussion, it sounds like, when we get to the bylaws and go from there.
Just to complicate matters further, I did want to add that Supervisor Provenza is a member of the CCP and can vote on CCP matters. The only restriction on Supervisor Provenza voting, and this goes for a couple of others as well, is when it comes to this local plan, the strategic plan. Otherwise, all members of the CCP can vote on anything before the commission. So Supervisor Provenza, you can vote on the agenda.
Okay. Well, that's news to me, so I will start voting.
So I don't know exactly where we left off, Julie, if you can.
I ended with the sheriff's department.
Okay.
Okay, so Chief of Police John Miller.
Aye.
Karen Larson,
Aye.
Ian Evans,
Aye.
Mark Nigel,
Aye.
and Laura Valdez.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes.
All right, that brings us to agenda number 3, public comment, an opportunity for members of the public to address the CCP on subjects related to CCP business and not otherwise on the agenda.
Just want to, excuse me, just point of order. This is Garth Lewis. I wasn't called for in the roll call vote. I will vote aye.
My apologies on that. Sorry about that, Mr. Lewis. I'll put you down as an aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you could put me as an aye as well.
Okay,
Thank
got
you.
it.
All right. Do we have any public comment?
I don't have any hands raised, Chair.
Thank you. That brings us to number 4, member announcements. Are there any announcements? I don't see any. I'd like to just announce that myself, Will, and Beth participated in the CSAC's Results First Next webinar last week. There's 3 more coming up over the next couple months. And again, it's just a continuation of Results First and how to better align our practices going forward. So we did attend that. All right, brings us to number 5, consider CCP bylaws. I'll turn this over to County Council.
All right, thank you, Dan. Phil Pogledich, County Council. So recently, while doing research that was frankly unrelated to CCP bylaws, I came across a set of CCP bylaws on the website for Monterey County. And in reading through them, I thought they did a good job laying out what the CCP is, what the executive committee is, what the overall function of the CCP is, what the role of the executive committee is with regard to the local plan, and otherwise covering an array of issues that we commonly encounter. I thought they might be helpful for this group to look at. I shared them with Chief Rutnick and a couple others. The chief agreed. What you have before you is essentially the Monterey bylaws with a few minor edits here and there to make them more closely reflect this body and its practices. But by and large, they're quite similar to the ones that Monterey has adopted. And I'll say I haven't done a scan of other county CCPs to see if they also have bylaws or analyze the extent to which those might differ, such as by providing for working groups of citizens or otherwise providing for expanded outreach to the community. But these are relatively straightforward and track the statute. I thought they would be helpful, as I said, and I think you should look at them individually with an eye toward determining whether something like this, maybe it's these bylaws, maybe it's these bylaws with some amendments, would be helpful to this group in guiding its operations. I didn't draft them in a way that would expand roles or contract roles, but tried to draft it, well, really to mirror what Monterey had, but also to ensure that it tracked the statutory provisions that guide the function of the CCP and the CCP Executive Committee. I don't necessarily expect this group will be ready to approve these bylaws today exactly as they're written. I think there could very well be some discussion around different points. We've already discussed one issue relating to alternates. I frankly, as I said, want you to consider in acting on them today, whether they would be helpful to the group as drafted or what would make them more suitable for purposes of this group. And I guess implicit in that is a question of whether you want bylaws in the first place. But I think something like this could ultimately be a good guiding framework for the operation of the CCP, and look forward to any feedback that you have. I'm also, of course, happy to answer questions about the bylaws.
This is Jonathan. I just have a comment on Article 4 under Executive Committee, the bottom of page 2. I don't know if those 2 sentences at the bottom are taken from Monterey, but those do not track 1230.1 at all. Because if you read 1230.1, the vote on the plan is not a recommendation. It's a vote on the plan, and the board doesn't approve it. It's accepted absent a 4-vote majority to not accept the plan by the Board of Supervisors, and then it goes back to the CCP. So it's not a recommendation, and it's the Board of Supervisors doesn't approve. They accept absent a 4/5 vote. So that's the only constructive feedback I have. Otherwise, they look good, and I think that having bylaws is a good idea. So thanks for doing that, Phil.
Yeah, and just to respond to that quickly, I'm going to agree with you at least 50%. It does say in 1230.1 that the CCP shall recommend a local plan to the County Board of Supervisors, but then further down, you're correct. The board is deemed to accept the plan unless it rejects it by a 4/5 vote, in which case it comes back to the CCP for further consideration. So we would want to revise that statutory language to reflect, again, I'd prefer to say recommendation, but you're correct that it's not approved by the Board of Supervisors. It's accepted by them unless it's sent back to the CCP by a supermajority vote.
And Phil, you're correct with the recommend. So I agree with you on that. I see that in there now. That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I had a question. This is Tracy. one about the bylaws. Is there authority to allow anyone other than the executive committee to vote? Or is that just something that we're creating authority through agreement? Because I read 1230 and I read 1230.1, and the only thing that talks about voting is in reference to the executive committee. So I'm just curious if there's something that I didn't see in those codes, and if there actually is affirmative authority, or if that's what we're creating through our bylaws by agreement.
I think the best answer is that you would be creating that authority through the bylaws, although for example, we voted earlier on approval of the agenda. If we vote to approve the bylaws, that's beyond what the statute contemplates, but it's consistent with accepted practices for the orderly function of administrative or governing bodies. I expect in the future there could be proposals to form ad hoc committees. Those might be committees of the full CCP or of the executive committee, and we would vote on that, of course. So I think there are functions that this group would perform in the course of its operations that would require a vote. And providing a means of voting on those functions or proposals is not inconsistent with the statute.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily objecting to it. I just didn't see any authority for that. So I just want to be clear that in this bylaw, you wrote that up kind of as a recommendation about how we should operate versus how statutorily we're required to operate.
Correct. The description of voting does not mirror the statute. The statute is silent on voting with the exception of voting on the local plan.
Okay. And then my question under quorum, is that the majority then of the bigger group or the executive committee?
So there's a separate quorum for each. The quorum that you're looking at, which is in section E, I think.
Yeah.
On page 2. Yeah, that would be of the bigger group. So that would be 6. Do we have, I'm looking now, we could add a quorum section under executive committee. I mean, in the event we are voting on the local plan, that would become significant. We need to make sure we have a quorum of the executive committee, which would be 4 of those members.
Okay. And then the last thing I wanted to point out, it goes A through M, right, for the bigger group. And we have Karen filling 3 of those sections. Karen Larson is G, H, and I, which is social services is G, mental health is H, and employment is I. And then we have Ian as the head of alcohol and substance abuse programs under J. Is there a reason why we can't add Nolan Sullivan, who is the department employment director, or I don't know what this title would be, Karen can tell me. And then Carlene, and I'm gonna butcher her last name, but you know who I'm talking about, Carlene to represent G for social services. So then we'd have Carlene, Karen, Nolan, and Ian, who are each the subject matter experts within HHSA of those particular areas. And I think that when this was written, the statute wanted to have experts, subject matter experts in those areas so we can make decisions fully informed going forward. So can we do that? Can we add those 2?
So that question has come up recently in a number of different forms. And my response to it is that the different functions you see described here, social services, mental health, employment, alcohol, and substance abuse, they're all addressed in the county ordinance that created a consolidated health and human services agency. Part of that ordinance defines the role of the HHSA director, and that role is inclusive of social services, mental health, and employment. Alcohol and substance abuse under the ordinance is held separately, or it can be, and it is in this particular instance, which is why Ian is a member of this group. My preference is if there was a desire to expand representation, I guess for lack of a better term, so that each of these functions is separately represented, would be to do a cleanup of the county ordinance for the Health and Human Services Agency. It's a minor thing. I think, frankly, it's just the addition of a sentence to say that that consolidation of functions doesn't carry over to representation on the CCP. That language or something a little more artful, maybe, would be sufficient, in my judgment, to restore the 3 separate seats there. rather than Karen serving on behalf of all three.
Is that required, or can we do the same thing like we're doing with voting, is make that part of our bylaws, because that's what we as a group decided is best?
Well, if we were to do it in the county code, I want to carry it over into the bylaws. Right now, the bylaws are drawn up with regard to the current structure. I would be inclined to recommend that the same change appear in the county code as opposed to just changing this in the bylaws and not having any parallel change to the county code. I could further consider that, but frankly, this is an area where, you know, I need to have conversations with Karen offline to make sure I understand her preferences. And I think the board might have some preferences about this too, which I'd want to be mindful of with regard to preparing a change in the ordinance. So, I mean, just in short, the change you're proposing is absolutely a change we can make. My preference is to do it through a change to the county code, which would then be mirrored in any bylaws we adopt at that time or have adopted at that time. But I feel that I want input from the board on this change and Karen.
This is Jonathan. My only comment is, I mean, when I read the statute and the way the CCP, our CCP was set up in conjunction, my view was, you know, in most counties, all these different areas are their own separate department with a separate department head. And so what I assumed is the intent of the statute was that each of these would be have their own member if they had a department head. And one of the reasons why I thought that is, number one, reading it, but number two, the way our CCP was set up originally with the head of Health and Human Services, since all these subgroups are under Health and Human Services in our county, I just assumed that in this case, Karen, being the department head, would be the representative. So that's my only comment on that.
And I want to make clear, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm happy to have the representation be whatever the preferences are. I mean, first of the board, second, Karen, and then third, this collective group. In describing changes to the ordinance and changes to the bylaws, I'm talking only about the best way to reflect participation by these different functions, not saying it should be one way or the other.
I think I'll just chime in a little bit. I think if we think back to when the CCP started, we didn't have a Health and Human Services Agency, actually. And so all these people have never been represented on our CCP, which may have been an error where we started. We only had the mental health director, I think, initially. I don't think we had the ESS, although I'm looking at Patrick's face.
Actually, Karen, we started with the CCP Executive Committee. And so the board of supervisors selected which among those three would sit on the CCP Executive Committee, which was the behavioral health director. And then, as you note, when Health and Human Services came about later and was combined, it became the Health and Human Services Agency Director. This is the first time we are meaningfully seating the full CCP. So this is the first time the issue has arisen during my tenure.
I think the other piece is, I think these discussions are always more robust the more people that participate in them. I think Nolan's perspective is often quite different than mine and adds quite a bit of value to conversations. Obviously, I think the same about Carlene and Ian. In their own right, they would have been department heads before we integrated. But each of them is over critical functions that affect our community and our offenders. And so having them participate in these conversations and be a member of the CCP would, I think, only add value to our conversations and ultimately our decisions.
And, you know, just to go back to what Pat said, only one of these seats has a voting role on the executive committee. I don't think that point was lost, but just want to make sure it wasn't. This would, though, enable all four of these positions to participate in the collective discussion, whether it's about the local plan or about any other CCP-related topic.
So is there enough interest in this to move this forward and take next steps? Looks like Karen's in agreement. I'm in agreement. Couldn't tell what Jonathan is or not by his comments.
See there, Tracy, is an example of something you could all vote on.
Right now? 7 of us, or?
I mean, I'm not saying it has to be right now,
Okay.
but sure. If you wanted to. I mean, the expression of general interest in this is coming both from the board and from this group. So, I mean, I'm happy to have a recommendation from the full group to consider in further conversations and potentially work by my office to change the county code.
The supervisor prevents it, yeah. You're on mute.
Having trouble with the Zoom today. Are we certain that the county code is consistent with this current state of the state statute?
Well, the state statute doesn't say much more than what you've got right here in front of you in the bylaws. And I came to the CCP as it is today, except for, I think I briefly advised the CCP back in 2014 and early 2015. So there was never a question really about seating each of these 3 functions separately or having Karen serve as a representative of all 3. I think the best thing to do would be to, I mean, the way the county code is right now, Karen is social services, mental health, and employment for all purposes. So my preference would be, I think it's far cleaner to revise the county code to separate out the role of a CCP representative from each of those functions, from each of those functions, and make clear that that is distinct from the role of the HHSA director, which has administrative oversight of all 3 of those functions. Again, I'm not quite sure what the right language is, but I do think a county code change is simple to accomplish and would avoid any confusion down the road if the desire is to have those 3 functions represented separately on the CCP.
Well, and part of the, I can't imagine there would be an objection from the board to this, but part of the consideration would be, are the individuals involved, do they have the time and interest to serve? Because we'll have quorum issues. And if somebody's participating regularly, it's helpful. If they're not participating regularly, it sometimes can be counterproductive. So if we do expand, we should have a commitment to attend the meetings and participate by anyone that we expand to.
I think that's a good point and something that maybe I can explore with Karen further as we continue to look at this issue and decide whether to bring something forward to the board or others for consideration. You know, I will say, while I was talking about voting on this, it's arguably a bit of a stretch to vote on this today because it's not really part of the agenda. I mean, it's indirectly the topic because of the way the bylaws are set up. It might be, let me think about that for just a minute as we continue to debate to see if it fits in within the broader scope of the agenda item. And Dan, I do think there may be public comments on some of these topics too, if you have any members of the public on the line.
Yeah, I was going to go to that next. Thank you. Let's open it up to public comment before we circle back. Do we have any public?
Yes, Francesca Wright.
Go ahead, Ms. Wright.
She needs to unmute herself.
Good afternoon. I welcome the conversation of including more voices in the discussion of, and I know they're not on the executive committee around decision making, but we haven't been hearing from employment services, and it's clear we need to hear more from mental health services. So I'm very encouraged by the openness, and I hope that you decide to support that diversification. The bylaws as written still fail to address how do we include more community partners, and I'm really happy to see that we have, and my screen just changed and so I can't see his name, but the gentleman who works with those on probation. But I do feel what's clearly lacking is more representation from families that are impacted by mental illness, and those that have emerged from the incarceration system, you know, be it the jail or the state. I feel if we really want to reduce recidivism, we need to have the voices of those that have either successfully done that or have had lived experience of what could make that transition better and their experience better, so that they can continue, that when others get out of jail, that they can reintegrate into the community. Well, this is one of the primary reasons for the creation of this partnership, and I still don't see it utilizing lived experience. Expertise is fabulous, and I'm really pleased about that, but lived experience is critical. And so I encourage, when you think of representation in the discussions, that you consider additional ways to invite in that lived experience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next caller is Lupita.
Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I apologize for missing the meeting in August. There's a lot of things going on at that time. It's good to see everybody here. Superintendent, I believe it was, oh, I can't see his name here, but Garth Lewis, thank you for being here. Sometimes I'll go to the Board of Education meetings too, just to pop in and check it out. But I do want to appreciate the access to this Zoom meeting. It was very hard to find on the website. It was difficult. I had to go digging around in the agenda and things of that nature. So I just wanted to ask that you guys maybe in the future have it clearly so that the public doesn't have to dig around, for those of us that might not be more familiar with computers or less familiar with computers. But I just wanted to reiterate what Francesca had said, the role of the CCP being to provide opportunities for not only the public, but for other stakeholders to make commentary onto how to reduce recidivism and make improvements to the local criminal justice system. I just wanted to, first of all, thank all of you for being transparent. I came in with a very, first coming to these meetings with a very heavy heart, having had bad experiences in my own family in the criminal justice system, not in Yolo County, but in another county. And so when I came here, I had my doubts, but you know, I feel it's very promising. I mean, there are a lot of problems in the county with regards to the criminal justice system, but I also don't want to understate the fact that, you know, those of us that have been here coming to these meetings appreciate the participation of all those who attend. And we've seen lots of people, you know, almost bending over backwards to try to kind of make this work. And now through this COVID and the smoke, we appreciate these meetings and being able to come and make our comments. And I know sometimes some of the things that we might say might be offsetting, but just know that we're here to speak on behalf of our communities. And I'm really excited to see that mental health is actually finally being on the table as a platform. People are talking about it. There have been some incidences. I'm really concerned with a lot of the language that's coming out, a lot of the divisiveness in the community. So hopefully we can build a bridge and provide opportunities for formerly incarcerated and incarcerated folks to make an improvement in their lives and change their own lives and provide a way to transition out. The last thing I wanted to say was we do need to provide more services if people are going to be released early. That's going to be a potential issue if these people don't have a way to transition back into society. So I'm really happy that you guys did release a lot of the people because of the COVID fear. There's no reason why people should be dying for petty crimes due to this pandemic. However, this is going to be an issue until we understand that they need transitional services, and we need to provide that network of support for them so that they can get back to their normal lives. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you. Next.
Maria Grijalva.
Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to thank you for this opportunity to chime in virtually. I can't express enough the I'm so glad that we're able to participate like this because we couldn't do this pre-COVID. And so this is actually a way to extend our outreach to the community by having them attend virtually. And so I can't express enough the importance of having the community involved so that you folks on your end have firsthand knowledge of how getting released, the experience getting released and what it's like for the person that's getting released and for the members, the family members that are receiving them. And so I really want to say dittos to what Lupita and Francesca said. The family input, community participation is so critical so that you can make informed decisions. And so my son, as I've told you before, is a perfect example. Okay, I've got a minute here. And he was involved in the criminal justice system in Sacramento County. As you might know, he is autistic and schizophrenic. His voices started when he was 19, 20, and 21. Back then, we were living in Sacramento County. He comes home one day, and he's got on his stomach tattooed Sakura, which is considered a gang. And I told him, son, what did you do? He goes, oh, I saw this on someone and I thought it was nice. I said, son, that's a gang. That's gang related. He goes, oh, no, it's not, Mom. It's pretty and I like it. And now I have it on my stomach. And I said, son, you have no idea what you've done. And so he's, and so he was locked up because he had domestic violence situations. And so he was in the system. And it was because of a lot of work on my part that we had to keep him home and out of the system, that he's not in the system right now. But 34. So just to give you an example, he was sitting down in the car parked in front of the house and he was drinking a beer, and someone, a police officer, pulled up and gave him a ticket for because he was listening to music in the car and he was not driving. The car was cold and he got a DUI for sitting in the car. So that is the way the law is used wrong. And so anyway, thank you so much for this opportunity to provide input.
Thank you for your comments. Next.
I don't have any additional hands raised, Chair.
Okay. I'll open it back up to the larger CCP for additional conversation or input.
Dan, I just want to make a quick comment. I was hesitant to say we could vote on a recommendation regarding the Health and Human Services Agency seats, but looking at the bylaws, I see we have some language in there. There's an asterisk that specifically addresses the consolidation of those functions with the HHSA director position. And for that reason, I think a recommendation would be okay. I'm not saying you should make one. I mean, the main purpose of this item is the bylaws, but because that came up, I just want to say I think that's fair game.
Okay. Others?
Well, I would like to hear back from Karen and also after she has a chance to speak to the people involved, because as the point I made earlier, we want to get people here who can be active and engaged. So I'm sure the board would not have any objection to any of the individuals mentioned in the bylaws being here specifically, but I'd like to hear a recommendation from Karen and give her the chance to speak to the individuals who might be involved before we vote.
I really appreciate that, Supervisor Provenza. This actually came up a couple of months ago, and so I've talked to my executive team about this potential. They are anxious and willing to be involved in these conversations. We all agreed that we have different perspectives, that I can't adequately represent all of their perspectives, and I don't always know all the specifics of their different areas of responsibility, despite being the director of the agency. So they are willing to take on the responsibility and committed to being a part of CCP if that is the will of the group.
Okay, good. That's good news.
This is Jonathan. Yeah, I mean, I agree that having the different perspectives and specialties as part of the discussion is a good thing. I also agree with Ms. Wright, having a lot of input from people with lived experience is important also. I realize there's no place for a representative on the committee, but certainly I encourage them to speak out during our public comments, and I know many of them have, so I really appreciate that.
So one approach we could take, it's just a suggestion, is I know we have a couple more agenda items. I could prepare a Word document that summarizes, I think, 3 different changes that I've heard today to the bylaws. Maybe I could then email that to Eric and he can put it on the screen. And if the changes, along with the balance of the bylaws, look good to this group, you can make a motion on it at that time. Again, this is after you consider the other agenda items. We can come back to this. But I'm happy to defer to whatever you'd all like to do.
Can I just ask a point of clarification, Phil, around the alternate voting members? I know this has come up for me specifically in the past that I wasn't allowed to have an alternate. And so that's why I frequently call in on my vacations or when I have other meetings scheduled. And so I just want to clarify that I too will be able to have an alternate for voting purposes on the CCP.
Yeah, that's
okay.
Reading this, but yeah, it would allow for that.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Karen, did someone tell you can't have an alternate? Because I thought that everyone, I mean, a lot of these departments have had alternates. I didn't realize that you were told you couldn't have an alternate, like our office, the sheriff. That's been pretty common.
Yes, I was told by county council, not Phil, that I was not allowed to have an alternate.
So I will say the statute is silent on alternates. And so that's been sort of a difficult issue for my office. And we've debated it both ways in the past. I mean, in general, I think alternates are a great idea on any committee or commission, because sometimes the primary member can't be there. You still want that group to get its work done. And looking, as I said, at the bylaws from Monterey, I saw they'd addressed it this way and felt that was worth proposing to all of you. I don't think it's so clear one way or another in state law that we're prohibited from allowing alternates if that's the will of the group.
Okay, so it sounds like we'll move on, and then Phil, you're going to work on some changes, and then we'll readdress it at the end of the meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, and just to be clear, I do not have the Word version of this document, or if I do, maybe I'll pull the wrong one up. So I'll just summarize the changes, and then that can be the subject of a motion when we come back to this, if you're all ready to move on this. If not, then we can bring it back in a future meeting too. So I'll put that together, and you can make a decision on how you want to proceed.
Okay. With that, we'll move on to agenda item number 6, review board direction related to the CCP budget. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Blacklock.
Thank you, Dan. Since over the last year, the CCP Executive Committee and then full CCP has had some discussions about your role going forward, and then more recently specific to the budget for the current fiscal year. And the board followed that up with some significant discussions at the board meeting as part of the adopted budget hearing. And I thought it important for the CCP to hear the board members in their own words and then reflect on that in terms of next steps for the CCP going forward. And so with that, Eric, if you could bring up a clip from the adopted budget board hearing. Just what we can do is Dan and I can consult with Eric Will, the CCP analyst, and come up with some strategies, and then keep the board informed and plan that early in the next fiscal year we'll be back with some ideas before we ever get to the end of the budget making process next year.
Okay.
I think that would be fine, but as I try to listen more deeply here to this conversation, I think that you're talking about deep cultural changes, which is what people are striving for, not just budget review and not just budget allocations and the inevitable showdown over the budget which occurs, but instead deep cultural changes. And when I listen to what the membership of the group is, I wonder how can you inculcate, even with the addition of a social services person, in that particular arrangement of individuals, deep lasting cultural change? And I don't know how you can do it from there, but I think when I listen to these conversations, that's what I'm thinking of. How do we introduce a different way of envisioning these problems? How do we introduce this sort of deep thinking around issues like how we not only how we structure budgets, but how we meet the needs of the community, what our performance objectives are, etc. That gets to the heart of this of what Oscar is talking about, which is let's get this stuff done up front, so when we get to this stage, we're ready to roll and we're all in agreement. I think that's the direction we need to go.
Great point.
No, that's exactly right, Mr. Chair. I mean, I not to minimize the responsibility or the work that we have in front of us, but you're absolutely right. I mean, this system that we are responsible for, where the buck stops with us, is moving at a pretty good clip along, right? We're not just cruising through surface streets. We're on a highway moving pretty quickly with a lot of responsibilities, a lot of moving parts. You don't just slam on the brakes on Tuesday because someone's going to go through the windshield. I mean, we've got to figure out in a more thoughtful way how we're going to make meaningful, deep changes to a system that has multiple tentacles. And it doesn't just come with, and I know this conversation, it's going to be for a while. We're going to continue this conversation, but you don't just start cutting parts of the budget without really assessing the impacts of what's going to happen, because everything we've done, budgeted for and otherwise, and Karen will tell you this because under Health and Human Services, everything has multiple streams of funding. And if you just pull something out without thinking it all the way through, you're going to undermine the underpinnings of much of our system without knowing it. So I worry a little bit about, getting too quick to assess specific cuts without fully, understanding the impacts in the long term in a systemic way that addresses the very issues that we all want to address. So,
I count ourselves fortunate that we will not go through the windshield with Mr. Safety Restraints on the board like yourself. We just have to watch for the parts that are left over and we'll be okay.
Oh, you're conflating there, but I think part of it, just like our strategic plan, our board strategic plan informs our budget, the community corrections plan informs this budget. And so really, even though it takes a 4/5 vote to overturn the recommended budget, which is not something that I believe should ever be required, but that's the state of the law, we should focus on that plan and make sure that what is in the plan is what fits in with what we want and what is consistent with our strategic plan. And then the budget logically follows.
That gets at it. I think my interest is to tie the CCP activities, plan and budget to the original goals and to measurable objectives with evidence-based practices, and the same thing that the darn thing called for in 2011 that we've been striving for the last 9 years and are not quite there.
Well, that's how you achieve accountability.
Yeah, it's time. It's past time. And getting that in place before we have another one of these budget conversations would be a good accomplishment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And so the purpose of this agenda item was to provide that feedback from the board and then hopefully to have some discussion among the CCP members to hear reflections on that, to hear your thoughts in terms of what changes may be needed, how to structure ourselves going forward so that next year when we enter budget time, which is not that far off, we'll hopefully have a greater sense of alignment, a greater sense of unanimity amongst the group than what we've experienced in past years. But I want to stop talking and let you discuss it and reflect on that clip amongst yourselves. And so with that, I'll hand it back to you, Dan. You're muted, Dan.
Thank you for that. No, with that, I'll open up to the group and just open up for a broader conversation. I don't know if anyone wants to go first or.
I'll start. So I have been critical in previous meetings about what I thought was kind of the last minute nature of us trying to align our budget with our strategic plan, et cetera. I mean, I've been critical on a bunch of stuff. I'm willing, if this group wants to create an ad hoc committee, I'm willing to serve on that. I've talked to actually Chief Miller, who's willing to serve on it as well. We thought that, I mean, obviously more people, Karen Larson, I think would be willing as well. We thought that we might be able to come up with a process that everyone could participate in, maybe some alternatives to how we've been doing it that haven't been considered before, and just really go to work early and bring these things back to CCP for everyone's input, but to at least kind of put the work, start doing the work now, and then make sure we're not in the same position next year. And what we would be doing, the good thing about Chief Miller gets no money from CCP. You know, none of the police agencies do. I get very little money from CCP. Karen gets a chunk, but it really doesn't go to her. It's passed through directly to clients. So there's an argument that we would be, because we don't have dogs in the fight, we could be maybe an effective group that isn't worried about protecting anything that we're getting, but just kind of look at it more holistically.
I'll chime in there also. Tracy used the word I've used many times about the dog in the fight. Remind folks that when I first came to the CCP as the county chief's representative, local law enforcement did get money and we were unable to justify it. That was one of my first tasks, and honestly, yeah, it was kind of futile when I turned to the police chiefs. It's frustrating for me that it seems like it's, like Yogi Berra said, deja vu all over again every time we run into the budget cycle. So I think we definitely need to, to fix it. And yes, I'm definitely willing to work on that ad hoc committee with Tracy to try to come up with a better budgetary plan.
I think it was pretty clear from the board comments you heard that the board is asking for alignment between the strategic plan and the budget. And the budget from the beginning has always seemed to include things beyond realignment, the Realignment Act of 2011, and some things that were included. And ideally, we should be able to look at the budget and say, these are the elements of community corrections that were allowed by AB 109 in the realignment, and these are our goals in accomplishing that, and this is what it's going to cost. And I think if it takes an ad hoc committee to get there, hopefully then everybody on this community corrections partnership would be able to point to the budget and explain how it relates to the strategic plan. And that should be very possible, and I think that will make it much easier for the board when we get this budget presented to us every June and then September.
This is Jonathan. Yogi Berra also said, a nickel ain't worth a dime anymore. I agree with all of you, and I share, well, many of you, the frustration that really the budget issues are brought before us in the 11th hour, and there's really not much we can do by that point in time. Excuse me. And I do think we need to start right away working on the budget, aligning it with the strategic plan, looking at the statute in terms of what we're supposed to be doing. And I'd definitely be willing to sit on that ad hoc committee also.
Yeah, my comments are watching the board comments and also sitting through it, participating a little bit on it, but not much. It is time, and I know we all agree to that. It's just now figuring out how to go about it. So potentially a ad hoc committee may be the right way to go.
If you're talking about executive committee members, I think we're limited to 3 of those. And then we can add, though, Phil will know for sure, but then I think we can add more from the larger body right? To stay within Brown Act, we can't have more than 3 executive committee members.
Yeah, that's right. What I was telling Dan earlier in a separate exchange was I think an ad hoc committee could be up to 5 members of the larger group, but we want to make sure not to have more than 3 from the executive committee to avoid having a majority of that group participating on a subcommittee.
I mean, I would propose, like I said, I'm willing to do it. Chief Miller's willing to do it. I talked really briefly with Karen Larson and she was willing to do it. That would be 3. And then 2 more people from the broader group, which could be whoever wants to.
I'd be interested in that.
So that's 4. Is it anyone else from the 5th, from the broader group?
Laura, maybe you're interested?
I can definitely participate in that if you need the 5th, and I would like to be able to voice what victims need as well. So definitely, yes.
And just so we're clear, we're not, well, okay.
I was going to say, before we do a motion or anything, I'd like to open it up to public comment real quick, if that's possible.
I have Francesca Wright.
All right, go ahead, Ms. Wright.
Hi, I appreciated Tracy's comment about thinking through a participatory process. I don't know if any members of the public are allowed to serve on ad hoc committees. I have been a program evaluator as a career. And one of the things that you do in program evaluation is you start with the results that you're trying to achieve. And then you have some sort of logic model by which you look at your investments and their contribution to what you're trying to achieve. And in that way, you can have measurable objectives of your goals. And then you have your theory of what are the different activities that can impact those goals. And then you can hone in on those activities and find ways to see whether they're contributing or not toward those goals. And I think that's the kind of mindset that you want to have on your strategic plan. You want to be able to measure, are you getting the results that you want? The budget doesn't have to be exactly proportional to each result. It has to be sufficient to get results that are measurable. And so I would be happy to serve on that if the public is allowed to have a role. And if they're not allowed to have a role, I urge the ad hoc committee to not be vague, but to be very specific. If you're going to get to those deep cultural changes, you have to be really clear on what you want to change. And if you want to reduce recidivism rate in Yolo County, you've got to measure it and you've got to examine the contribution of different activities toward that. Anything short of that kind of intentionality and accountability will neither get the results that you want nor meet the Board of Supervisors' objectives of alignment of budget rationale with intended outcomes in your strategic plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Lupita?
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Community Corrections Partnership members. I just wanted to reiterate what Francesca was saying about needing data and demographics to establish a baseline. And once a baseline is established using the statistics and the data analysis, specific goals and objectives can be obtained. And so in order to do that, the stats need to be there. So I would recommend getting some of the data that you guys have already acquired through the different facets of the criminal justice system, and then having a statistical analysis so you guys have a more correct, because I know there was problems with some of the data that was presented. Once you're able to obtain that information, then you guys can have kind of like something to base it on, and then be able to quantify the specific parameters that you guys are trying to change. I think that's a really great idea, and having people from the community such as Francesca, I know a person I'd like to recommend to the ad hoc committee, people that have that experience doing research and quantifying data would be really helpful to you guys. The importance of that being that you can track your progress. I think one of the things that I have a personal issue with is not being able to track progress in the group. Like there's no way for you guys to say this is working, this is not. So if you guys could find a way to do that so that your objectives are able to be in more alignment with the strategic plan, that would be just a personal recommendation. And also, again, getting input from the community, suggestions, advice from people that have a lived experience through the criminal justice system in Yolo County. That has been for me really eye-opening in a lot of ways. I think that once people start to hear some of the problems, you'll find that some of these issues can be easily fixed. And some of them are going to take deep, like Supervisor Sandy had mentioned, very deep paradigm shifts in the general culture of the criminal justice system. And it's not to say that, you know, you're letting out all the criminals. I really hate it when people say that, because, you know, just like when I speak about law enforcement, I always tell people the same thing with the incarcerated. These are people's brothers, these are people's sisters, these are people's parents, these are family members, and we're sending them to prison. Over prosecution rates are really high in this county, and in many instances, like in the instance of Maria Grijalva's son, for no reason. There's no reason. And so like some of these things can be simple. The targets can be set kind of like a short-term targets, and then you guys can set long-term goals. But there are things that the community can provide as creative ways that we can implement some of these changes without doing the drastic kind of fear changes that'll overhaul the entire thing too fast. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Maria Grijalva.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ditto what Lupita and Francesca had said. And also I wanted to add that I bring to the table a master's level education in education administration, multicultural education. And I don't have my degree in master's. I didn't get my degree. I didn't complete my thesis because I was in a auto accident that resulted in 4 spine surgeries. But the education I have, and I also, of course, I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and not in cognitive psychology, like in regular therapy psychology, but rather in behavioral psychology, which is really what human nature responds to. And so I bring that to the table, and that I wanted to add and contribute. And so as far as the paradigm shift, this is, you know, something where we need professionals to come in, such as social psychologists, sociologists, or psychologists, anthropologists, that can help us understand the higher social hierarchy. Because to me, politics means social hierarchy. So there's a social hierarchy right now. We have the dominant culture, which is the one that holds the cards, you might say. And we have the minority groups that are not, that don't. And so we need experts that will help us with this. We don't need to make this paradigm shift. We need professionals that will help us in those areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
I don't have additional hands raised.
All right, thank you. That'll end public comment on this item. I'll turn it back to the CCP to comment further.
I have a question for Phil. Can you add members of the public without going beyond 5? Like, can you have 5+ members of the public?
Now, the problem is that under the Brown Act, if you add a member of the public, it's no longer a true ad hoc subcommittee, which means that the committee would need to conduct its activities in compliance with the Brown Act. So release a notice and agenda 72 hours before each meeting, refrain from informal conversations involving majority of the subcommittee in between meetings, things like that. So it does complicate the operations of the committee. It's not to say you can't constitute a committee with public members. It just couldn't be an ad hoc subcommittee and exempt from the Brown Act. You could invite public participation at meetings on topics. So it's not like the public has to be excluded from the conversation, but membership on the committee would be off limits if it's a true ad hoc subcommittee.
All right. Where would what would the group like to do about this? Is there?
Can I make a motion?
Yes.
So I'd like to make a motion to form a budget subcommittee, ad hoc subcommittee consisting of myself, Chief Miller, Karen Larson, Mark Nigel, and Laura Valdez.
I'll second that motion.
All right. So we have a first by Tracy, a second by Supervisor Provenza. With that, we'll ask the clerk to do a roll call vote, please.
Oh,
there we go.
thank you. Supervisor Provenza,
Aye.
Member Raven.
Aye.
Member Olson.
Aye.
Member Captain Oviedo. Looks like
Captain Oviedo. Oh, there you go.
Abstaining.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Abstain from.
Abstain. Okay, thank you. Police Chief Miller.
Aye.
Member Larson.
Aye.
Member Evans.
Aye.
Member Nigel.
Aye.
Member Valdez.
Aye.
And Chief Fruitneck.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Julie, I think you might have skipped over Superintendent Lewis.
Oh, I did again. I apologize. I keep doing that.
I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Oh,
Aye.
Superintendent Lewis, okay, thank you so much. I won't miss you next time.
Right up.
All right, that brings us to number 7, initiate development of AB 109 10-year report, and I'll turn this over to Eric Will.
Great. So good afternoon, members of the CCP. Eric Will, CCP analyst with the County Administrator's Office. And so as we're talking about the budget today and thinking about our strategic planning moving forward for the CCP, we thought it would be helpful as we reach the 10-year anniversary of AB 109 and of this group to put together a report of the outcomes, the successes, the overall progress of this group. And so what I'm asking and just reporting out today is just that we'd like to put together a report that I could come back to at the next CCP meeting, which would be in January, to report out on the 10-year progress of this group from AB 109. And so the plan would be that I would be reaching out to the individual CCP members to gather your reports and your outcomes and successes, similar to what the CCP has done in past years related to the budget, but looking more at the broader sense of this group to get a sense of the overall outcomes and progress once again. And then after coming back to the CCP for a reporting out, to actually go to the Board of Supervisors as well to provide this reporting out as well, just as a means of looking at the budget and beyond for programmatic things that we've been working on within the CCP, just to give us a sense of our timeline and what progress has been made. And so with that, that's my quick update on this, and I'd be happy to answer any questions or any comments about the subject.
Comments or thoughts from anybody? I'll start, Eric. I like the idea. I think it's going to be a lot of work, so we're going to have to kind of figure that all out. We'll have to rely on a lot of historical knowledge from members, but it'd be interesting to see. I know, I believe we're currently doing good work, and I know prior to my involvement, there was a lot of great work done, and it'd be nice to kind of memorialize that in some sort of capacity. However, I do understand that it's going to be time consuming. So those are my thoughts. Any other thoughts or concerns?
I mean, I agree with Dan that I think it's a good idea to memorialize kind of where we're at this point. And if nothing else, it gives us a benchmark for these conversations we're having today and moving forward, and something to compare to as we continue to, this group continues to evolve and grow and set new benchmarks and set new ways to measure itself. I think it'll be it seems like it would be a good effort to capture that historical knowledge and data, like you said, and give us a path of where we're moving forward.
Anybody else on the CCP? Okay, I'll open it up for public comment on this agenda item. Is there any public comment?
I don't have any hands raised.
Okay. So I guess I asked the CCP, I mean, I don't think we need an official vote, but just, is this something that others are interested in pursuing? Just a head shake, yes, no, thumbs up. Okay. All right, Eric, I think it's a good idea, and we'll obviously do what we need to do to make it happen. With that, I'll circle back to number 5, the agenda on the bylaws, and see if County Council has an update or if we're ready to talk about that.
So yeah, I've sent a Word document off to Eric and Julie to put on the screen. I've twice caught typos in it, so they have 3 different versions. We'll see if they got the right one up here. Yes, that's the correct one. So briefly, in tracking the conversation, I understood there were 3 proposed changes. The first is what Jonathan and I discussed right at the beginning, relating to the function of the Board of Supervisors in receiving the local plan. And I've revised the language to say that unless the board rejects the plan by a 4/5 vote and remands it to the executive committee for further consideration, this is up under 1A here, the plan is deemed approved. So that was how I proposed to revise that portion of the bylaws. Next, and these are in no particular order, I would add a section C to Article 4, which addresses the executive committee. And it would address the quorum issue using just about the same language as was used for the full CCP, and say that the quorum is no less than the simple majority of executive committee members. Okay, there's another typo. I should say alternates rather than alternatives, but alternates will be counted toward a quorum only in the absence of the principal member, basically just so that people can't vote twice. And then finally, we have the section on the HHSA director. That's in 1C here, and also is the subject of item 2. But in 1C, I would add language at the end of the asterisk paragraph, which currently describes that the positions are consolidated and constitute a single voting seat on the CCP, to say that if the board, and I'll paraphrase, if the board later says the positions should be held separately, then this provision shall not apply. Each position will be held separately and accorded the same participation, voting, and other rights that are available to all other CCP members. And consistent with that, I have item 2 here, which is to recommend that the board amend the county code to authorize those 3 HHSA positions to be held separately rather than by the director. I think that captures our discussion, but if not, then I'm happy to hear any proposals for changes or additions to this. And again, this is a suggestion. If folks want more time with the bylaws, that's fine too. Just want to provide some structure in the event you want to move forward with acting on them today.
Well, I do have one question.
Sure.
Okay, reference HHSA director. Is it possible that these would be her subordinates and answer directly to her?
They will be her subordinates, yes.
Okay, I guess my concern is if their direct reports to her, and Karen, this is not against you or anything like that, but just position, it would definitely tip this board in regards, I'm not sure if I'm making my point. They answer directly to her, Karen in this case, the balance of the board is definitely tipped. That makes sense?
Yeah, in theory, I think what you're saying is she could exercise the influence of 3 seats, maybe even arguably 4 seats.
Yes, thank you.
I don't know that there's a way to handle that. I think that's simply a risk we would have to live with and expect that, well, expect that they would act independently, consistent with their separate appointment to the CCP board. But I understand the concern.
But to clarify, I am the one who has the vote on the executive committee. Those other members would not have a vote on the executive committee. So I think where we have the most opportunity for, you know, disagreement or what have you, there would only be 1 vote for the Health and Human Services Agency. There wouldn't be 4 separate votes. in terms of
That's
the budget
correct.
and strategic plan.
Yeah, the most meaningful votes relate to the strategic plan and its implementation. So Karen's correct. That's where just a single vote comes into play from that agency.
But I mean, we are voting on a whole host of issues. That's only one vote of many during the course. And I mean, I think that's what I was talking about initially. The intent of the statute was it was for independent department heads. So it wasn't, you know, a consolidation of 4 departments with one of the members being the superior or the other 3 being subordinates to the other one. And that's how it was written, you know, with separate department heads in the statute. So I guess, you know, we talked about adding additional people for discussion. I mean, that was what we had talked about earlier. We didn't talk about voting. We talked about, and that was my comment about adding specialties to hear their views and perspectives. And I think we were talking discussions and not voting.
By that rationale, then Laura Valdez would not be able to fill the victim advocacy role representative because she's your subordinate.
Right. She would not be able to vote. She would be there to discuss, but that's true, right?
Yeah, but she is a voting member. So we'd have to get a new number M. We'd have to replace Laura.
I would honestly, I mean, there's enough confusion already with this group and how it operates to add 2 tiers of CCP members, voting and non-voting, in addition to having both the CCP and the executive committee and the somewhat distinct role of the executive committee. I don't think we need to add any more complication. But I'm not a voting member. I guess I should probably stay out of the debate.
So is what I'm looking at, are those all the changes? Because, you know, when I was listening to you, like I'm a visual person, so I needed to see everything. And I'm looking at, does this shared document represent all the changes that you made? It's hard for me to tell.
Those were the 3 that I thought I heard. Maybe some level of agreement is kind of an overstatement. I thought I heard a basis for making these 3 changes in the discussion. I don't recall hearing anything further. If I missed anything, though, let me know. I should, ideally, this would be in a red line, but I didn't realize that Eric was actually, and Julie, Beth, kind enough to email me the original document, but I didn't see it until after I'd already drafted this.
So then, does this speak to the issue of voting that we've been discussing for the last 5 minutes? These amendments?
The original language speaks to voting. Could you be more specific? I'm sorry, I'm not following exactly.
Well, I mean, you know, because Chief Miller raised a good point about you have 4 members, all 3 of them subordinates to another. And then as Tracy pointed out with Laura, there's 1 subordinate to me. And I know when we were initially discussing this, we were talking about expanding it for purposes of discussions. And that's what that wasn't, we didn't talk about voting, we just said discussions. And
yeah, I didn't understand that to be a limitation that was intended by the group on the role of the additional participants. I mean, I thought the proposal was they would be full participants in the CCP. And again, the CCP Executive Committee is somewhat different. It has just a single voting seat for an appointee of the Board of Supervisors from the different HHSA functions, and Karen fills that.
Would it potentially make sense to form an ad hoc for this to vet out some of these issues and go from there rather than, I don't know if we're going to find consensus or anything today on it. I don't know if anyone's interested in that. That's an opportunity potentially.
I mean, this is Tracy. I'm not sure what we need an ad hoc for. I think that we just have to decide whether or not we want all these voices to participate, even if that means they have a vote. I mean, I don't mind if Laura has a vote, just like I wouldn't mind if Ian already has a vote, but Carlene or Nolan has a vote, because we're talking about things that have nothing to do with budget or strategic plan. We're talking about all the other subordinate decisions that we make. And yes, they would all have votes. Laura would have a vote, and so would Nolan, and so would Carlene under this proposal. But again, like Karen pointed out, this isn't having to do with strategic plan or budget issues. So we would never be in a situation where, you know, you'd have 4 people from HHSA and 2 people from the DA's office voting for pet projects. It's not structured that way.
Yeah, so I was, you know, a little unclear about that because I think it seemed like what Phil was talking about was just the strategic plan. But I guess, Tracy, you're saying this larger committee would not vote on any budget issues or the strategic plan? I mean, or the plan, the CCP plan?
My confusion as well, Tracy, because this just started up as far as, remember, the argument about is the strategic plan the budget? You know, is it one and the same? And nowhere in here do I see anything about budget in this entire document. You see under Article 4 about the executive committee purpose being a strategic plan.
I'm looking at Penal Code 1230.1. Section A says that the CCP, blah, 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 shall recommend a local plan to the County Board of Supervisors. And then B says the plan shall be voted on by an executive committee of each CCP. And then it lists the 7 agents or the 7 voters. So I think the way I interpret 1230.1 is that the executive committee and only the executive committee by statute is allowed to vote on the plan which accompanies a budget to the board. But
I want to make sure that is clear, because that was, remember, that discussion on the last meeting or meeting before, I'm losing track, where is the strategic plan, the budget, and vice versa.
And that's you know, our interpretation too. I agree with you, Tracy, that that this statute, you know, I'm talking about the 4/5 vote of the Board of Supervisors, applies to budgets and the local plan. So that sounds fine then. If the larger committee is voting on other issues beyond what's in the statute, which refers to the budget and the local plan. But I also feel like, I feel like I need the full document in writing, you know, to see it, because I think this sounds okay the way you're suggesting it, Tracy. And it's just hard for me with this small section, and like Chief Miller said, it doesn't talk about budget. But I think I'm on the same page as you, Tracy, that this larger committee could vote on anything, but not what's referred to in the statute, which is budget and the local plan.
Statute refers to the local plan, and I don't want to relitigate that debate, but the statute just refers to the plan. If the plan includes a budget, then there you go. That's also within the purview of the executive committee.
Would it be a good idea to add language about budget into Article 4?
I don't know what the basis for that would be. But again, this gets back into the debate Jonathan and I had last time, which by vote of the group, my position did not prevail. I would be hesitant to expressly address the budget in the bylaws. This doesn't preclude you from continuing to take the position you have a right to vote on the budget.
So you're saying if the plan includes the budget, then by statute, it would be the 7 executive committee members. But if the plan is separate from the budget, then your position is that the budget could be voted on by the full CCP?
I think the full CCP could recommend a budget to the board. I think the executive committee could recommend a budget to the board. Jonathan's position, and this group decided last time by a majority vote, that the budget is tantamount to the plan for purposes of the interpretation of Penal Code Section 1230.1, meaning that the recommended budget has to be adopted by the board unless it remands it by a 4/5 vote.
Just important to note that both Phil and I would recommend to the board that that's in conflict with the County Budget Act, and that the board retains domain over appropriations.
Even if it's part of the plan?
Correct. The CCP cannot take away the board's appropriation authority under the County Budget Act.
Okay, so when we said that when county council said if the budget's part of the plan, it becomes an exec, we're talking about two different things, aren't we? Okay.
Well, there's a common thread. I think if you put a budget in your plan, the executive committee appropriately votes on that plan, which is inclusive of the budget. But as Pat said, he and I agree that the Board of Supervisors is not bound to adopt it would still have to take separate action on a budget for the CCP. And I don't believe the CCP, by including the budget in the plan, constrains the authority or obligations of the board under the County Budget Act.
I guess the real question is refers to what Tracy was talking about in terms of that larger committee would not vote on any budget issues. That's what Tracy had said. And I don't know if that's clear, as Chief Miller was saying, I don't know if that's clear from the bylaws. I mean, they'd be able to vote on issues, but not on the local plan and not on budget issues.
Yeah,
well, I would say that the full CCP could vote on anything it wanted to. It's just a question of it would be a recommendation at that point to the CCP executive committee, I guess. But there's nothing that constrains the full CCP from taking votes on something. They just doesn't have any accompanying statutory authority. It's just a recommendation at that point.
I think that the way it stands today, our executive committee, while it has 7 members in title, doesn't truly have 7 members. The court refuses to vote, and I believe they aren't even on the call today. So we often end up in a place where we have a 3-3 vote where the board has to break a tie, or law enforcement all aligned together, and those of us that are on the side where we're advocating for client services or those sorts of things are always going to lose, and ultimately the client services are going to lose. And so the elephant in the room is we have to have, if we're going to have an executive committee, we need to have 7 votes, because you have to have an odd number to not have a tie that goes to the board all the time.
I don't think we've ever had a tie that had to be broken by the board.
We did last year.
But
on the budget.
Yeah, it seems like probation. I mean, I don't know that's, and it's unfortunate the court isn't here to vote, but I don't know that that's a reason to expand the board. But I do like the expansion and adding those, like I said, adding the perspectives of other specialists. But I guess the question is about voting. And I know Tracy initially said, the chief had a concern, and Tracy was talking about how the expanded committee would not vote on budget. So that's kind of, I guess, the sticking point right now.
Yeah, I thought that was covered in the plan, but I'm being told that that's not covered in the plan. So, yeah, so we're gonna have to figure that out.
So my suggestion is, if I think it would be helpful for all of us to have the full bylaws that we could read and discuss in our departments, and then I guess we'd come back and vote at a different time. It's just hard without having a chance to see the full document. And then the question also is then, who votes on that? Like, who's voting on that? This expanded group, or that's the other question that complicates things even more.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I'd like to see memorialized somewhere. Like I said, we talked about it ad nausea last meeting about strategic plan and budget, but I'd like to see it memorialized somehow, some way. Otherwise, it's subject to argument in future years. That the strategic plan is the budget, and the budget is part of the strategic plan.
Okay, so it sounds like we have a little bit more work to do to kind of make sure everything's in a row. At least that's what I'm hearing. So I guess we work on it and bring it back at the next meeting. Is that good with the group?
Yeah, this is Garth. Could that be a function of the ad hoc committee that was formed earlier to work on the budget, they would come forward to the CCP with a recommendation regarding the question of how the budget and the strategic plan function together, as well as a recommendation regarding how then it becomes an approved plan to go forward to the Board of Supervisors.
I think the problem with that, Garth, is that there's a different interpretation of the statute, and that's a legal issue. And so some of us interpret it differently than county council. That's kind of the issue. So I don't know that the ad hoc committee could make a decision on that. It's more of a legal issue, which we haven't had to address yet, but it could happen in the future.
I'm suggesting that they come forward with a recommendation, not necessarily that it be a standing decision, but it doesn't seem that the conversation really is moving forward at this point without some kind of recommendation.
So I can revise the bylaws to include the 3 points that that we have on the screen here, recirculate that as a red line document. And as I think Jonathan suggested, there can be discussion about it within departments or otherwise between now and the next CCP meeting, come back at that meeting and see how we all feel about it. But it seems like...
Sorry, aren't these two different issues? One is CCP has to determine who we want to vote on the budget, right? So should it just be executive or should it be the full body? But the legal question that Jonathan's talking about is after the CCP does whatever it does, what is the board's authority to accept or reject that? Aren't these two separate things?
I think you can look at it that way.
I think they are too. I mean, so there's really, it's not necessary for us to discuss the issue of the board's authority after we approve the plan and budget. But the second issue is something we could discuss. So,
does the ad hoc committee members want to take a stab at it? We already sent out emails. We're thinking about meeting in November, maybe.
Sure.
I think the original intention of the ad hoc was something different, but I mean, if we want to take a run at it just to move things forward, then definitely.
I'm okay with it.
So what exactly are they taking a run at?
I think it would be the revised, I'll revise the bylaws to include these 3 issues and the ad hoc. And I'd said that, you can all do this independently without an ad hoc as well. But if the group's preferences that the ad hoc take a look at the bylaws and come back with a recommendation, including any changes, that would certainly be an appropriate way to proceed too.
Maybe when Chief Miller said that, my recommendation is you send out the amended bylaws. We all decide for ourselves what we think, because really it's going to come down to a vote later, right? I don't know if this is an ad hoc committee thing either now that Chief Miller said that. So I kind of agree.
So then we would all work on it kind of independently. At our next meeting, we'll come back for a group feedback and then try to address it then.
It just comes down to, do you want CCP full body or executive body to vote on budget? That's all we're talking about, right? So I don't really think it requires changing the language around too much on that. I think we have to decide what we want, and then you make the language to reflect that.
I think that's right. It's all about who's voting on budget. I think Tracy's right.
Okay. I'm also thinking with the bylaws, there was a desire to have it all written out before we move forward with anything. Maybe I'm missing that part of it. So I guess, Pat, what I'm struggling for an action right now, if we need to take an action.
It seems to me to make sense to have county council prepare the revisions as Phil described and send it out to the group and discuss them at your next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, and I won't specifically address the budget, but if folks come with, I expect folks will come with proposals to add a line or two somewhere regarding voting on the budget at the next meeting. And we can take that as maybe the only unresolved issue at that time and get the bylaws done. Sound good?
I see a lot of nodding heads, so good.
Okay.
That leads us to number eight. Can I get a motion for ending the meeting?
I'll move.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay, Miller, do we need a roll call vote for this or? Nope, then let's end the meeting.
I was going to go first.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Bye.